Hi everyone and welcome to your horoscope for the week of June the 8th, 2020. We have a very intense sky playing out all throughout the week, but this is where the intensity is going to be very different at the beginning of the week and at the end of the week. Because as we step into next week, the predominant celestial conversation is still going to be that square conversation of tension between the Sun in the sign of Gemini and Neptune conjunct Mars in the sign of Pisces. And this is a very uncomfortable, a very frustrating, a very assertive kind of energy where, regarding the collective, regarding the world stage, this is definitely going to continue our quest for the truth. This is where we're still going to be bombarded with a lot of information, with a lot of fake news, with a lot of half truth, deception, manipulation, because Mars conjunct Neptune just amplifies the symbolism of Neptune and not always the most positive expression. After all, the ancients considered Mars to be the lower malefic, so it always brings challenges and assertive energies with it, and Neptune can be seen as illusions, as lies, deception, unhealthy fantasies, where we kind of twist reality to make it appear something totally else, something totally different. Of course, the positive expression of this energy is, our dreams and fantasies and manifesting them, because ultimately that is how the spirit, the divine, works through us. But this is where opinions, truth, spiritual principles, life philosophies, worldviews are definitely going to clash. And on the 13th of the month, when Mars forms the tight conjunction with Neptune, also joined by the moon, well, that can represent, mediatic, informational, psychological, spiritual warfare, where everything is going to be clashing on the internet, because the Sun is in the sign of Gemini and it can represent humanity's collective consciousness manifested, so online, the internet, where we share information, the news, media, or basically every single source of information that reaches us collectively. So spirits are going to be very, very high. People are going to be extremely emotional, and not always in the best possible way, because Mars can agitate us, Mars can enrage that Neptune. So if our feelings, especially our pains, our hurts, our dissatisfaction, our inner limitations, become a predominant force, well, that calls for action, because Mars, even in the watery prison of Pisces, where it can't exactly bring forth its haste and celerity, it is still going to demand action. So Mars is the god of war, so that action can be conflict, it can be assertiveness, it can be clashes, and it can be also violence. Another expression of this energy, and we're talking about Mars conjunct Neptune, well, that can be very physical, because Neptune rules the oceans, it rules water, it rules the tides. So that can be natural calamities which have to do with the element of water. So it can be floods, very big floods, dangerous floods, it can be tsunamis, it can be naval disasters, it can be destruction with the element of water. But at the same time, it can also represent conflict on the water, for example, like naval conflicts, or two countries, two nations disputing territories which they possess on the ocean, on the sea. Now, personally, for the individual, this can play out in a number of different ways, because whereas this very strong Martian activity in the sign of Pisces caused profound emotional and psychological purges, it has definitely taken us back to the past. It has revealed to us our hurts and pains, our repressed emotions, relationships, everything that we suffered in the past. everything that we had to repress in the past. But this is where, because it gets closer to Neptune, this isn't just a purge, this is also going back to the past and changing how we feel towards it, changing our emotional polarity regarding our past and everything that was very important and left a massive psychological or emotional impact on us, which has to do with the past. It can also be karmic relationships, soul contracts, everything that has to do with the sign of Pisces. And since it forms a square, an aspect of tension with the sun, while this challenges our egos, this is where we have to abandon our old sense of identity, who we thought we were. The person who we are in the present moment might be totally different than the person who we were in the past. So we have to release that attachment. We have to just surrender to the fact that we are simply no longer who we used to be, and we have to embody our new identity, which is much more strings and compromises and illusions and personal beliefs free, and that much more authentic, that much more who we feel, that who we are at the very, very core of our beings, because that is exactly the main symbolism of Neptune in the sign of Pisces. Also a massive gift, a massive celestial empowerment to all of us who are alive today, because Neptune is in its home sign of Pisces every 200 something years, so not every generation is going to benefit from this energy. And since Neptune rules this part of the sky, it is that much more powerful, and even if it's very uncomfortable, it can still represent a massive blessing in the skies, because it aligns us with the most authentic core of our beings, who we are, the source of our existence. This is where we can absolutely shift our consciousness from being enslaved, chained by matter and material things, and becoming that much more ethereal, because that is the primary energy of Neptune in its home sign of Pisces. Being ethereal, being a daydream, basically flowing like water, not having any limits, because Neptune, the symbol of the source of spirit, has also no limits, no boundaries. And most importantly, it always flows, it always reforms itself, it always dreams itself into a new shape and form, because this is the blessing of the mutable energy of Pisces, where we can change, we can alchemize absolutely everything, including the past, by going back emotionally and changing the way we feel towards the past, changing the way we perceived and processed whatever took place in our lives back then. And by doing this, we automatically change the present and the future. And basically, this is the massive gift of Neptune in its home sign of Pisces. And we still have a lot of time, because it's staying in here until the end of 2026. But let's return to the square between Neptune conjunct Mars and the Sun. So this is going to be highly uncomfortable, because it will require us to surrender. It will require us to find forgiveness in some cases, accept the past, accept all those things that we cannot change, that we do not have power over, and ultimately trust the source, trust the universe, trust that wherever we do not possess any power, it can help us, it can guide us, it can steer us towards our greater good. Because whenever we do not have power over something, well, that means that either that part of our lives or that specific area is something that we really shouldn't worry about, because we had it all planned out before we even came into physical reality. Or it can also mean that we are simply not supposed to have any influence, and all we can do is just go with the flow and trust our higher selves that we are gonna figure it out one way or another, that it's in the hands of fate, in the hands of Lady Fortuna, so to speak, and that basically it's part of our stories, it's part of our destinies, and it's perfectly okay not to have influence over that area of life. But not everyone can perceive it in such a clear manner. For some people, when they don't have power over something, it can obsess them, it can upset them, it can make them fight it all their waking lives. And this is where you're fighting the universe, you're fighting your fate, so that is always self-defeating. And I'm not saying that it's impossible to change it, it's impossible to rewrite it, but it's not gonna be done by ambition or by obsessing. It has totally different ways where you just have to reconfigure everything. And one of the ways which we can accomplish this is exactly what I have said earlier, that we change the way we feel over the past, over what happened to us in the past, the emotional impact and etc. All of that. When we change the way we feel, when we release emotional attachments, then we also instantly, in a very quantic, but also, neurological way, we change the present because we change our neural pathways. That means that memory, the chemical composition in the neurons basically of that memory is going to be altered, and that leaves us with a totally new configuration, which ultimately affects our subconscious minds, our programming. Because the sun in Gemini, what is our identity? Is it just not a program? A program which basically holds our divine spark and allows it to express itself, to manifest, to have influence over everything. Our own lives, the lives of others, society, everything. And communication, speech, interaction, sharing with others is one of the primary ways where we connect with other people, where we express ourselves, and ultimately it's part of what makes us alive, what makes us exist, because we are only alive when we are also alive in the minds of others, not just our own minds. Of course, hermits and special people, for example, like Buddhist monks, etc., make an exception, but those are people with totally different life stories, totally different archetypes and inner psychological configuration. Or it could be very well that they just made this choice and they had no choice but to adapt. And if we look at the bigger picture, that this is something that is going to be playing out in the lives of us individually, but also in the world stage, well, this is where it is definitely challenging our sense of identity, who we think that we are, for our highest good, because that is how we achieve progress, that is how we achieve change, not just individually, but collectively as well, because our identity also changes our value systems, it also changes our interhuman connections and all our relationships. So this is like a big game of domino, where every little piece of the puzzle is basically falling into its place, but this isn't a very quick process, and ultimately, by changing ourselves, this is how we can actually see, this is where we have proof, like physical proof, that we're also changing the world. And talk about change, Jupiter and Pluto retrograde in the sign of Capricorn are moving closer and closer to each other. Their conjunction isn't exact yet, but it is still influential enough for us to witness the massive changes taking place on the world stage, where it's deconstructing centralized power and inviting all of us to reconstruct it. So, Jupiter and Pluto, this is where all the weaknesses, the flaws, the bad decisions, the corruption of centralized power is being exposed. And this is a very long and ongoing process. But important moments, important steps, important pivotal points are going to be witnessed by us even next week. So this is an ongoing theme. With the difference that next week is going to add totally different energies to this big picture, where Pluto and Jupiter are going to be sextiling Neptune and also Mars. And this energy can play out in an infinite number of ways, basically, because Neptune is fantasy, is dreams, is the source, and even our own fantasies, even our inner creativity, even our minds, they have no limit. So that means that it can configure itself to any way, shape, or form it wants to. But fortunately, Pluto and Mars do give us some level of control over it, where one of the possible expressions of this energy is where our fantasies, our dreams, our prayers, our spiritual work, whatever we really desire and dream up, can enter reality. But at the same time, it can also mean us taking us back our powers from other people, from centralized power, from absolutely anything, and embodying it. Jupiter sextiling Neptune, this also changes the picture a little bit, because Jupiter is the inner truth. Yes, it is subjective, and Neptune is even more subjective, but it can still give us the power to configure whatever we want to believe, whatever we resonate with. This is where it's not as much about the mind, not even our emotional worlds, but rather straight to the soul. This is where our souls can act to our higher selves. The infinite intelligence locked within our subconscious can have a massive word to say in everything, especially the unfolding of our karma and our destinies, the sign of Pisces, especially Mars in it, the activator, the planet of action. So that is where we gain power and influence. But since this is a sextile, a harmonious conversation which needs action, which needs decision, which needs like an inner impulse to turn it into something, well, it can empower us in so very many different ways. For example, this is a wonderful energy for artists to create. This is also wonderful energy for karmic closures, for example. But at the same time, the negative expression of Neptune and Pluto can empower manipulators, those who deceive, those who play psychological and mind games. So, this is where the stars don't actually choose. The stars just empower us, and it's up to us how we use it. And if we want to use it for not very positive, not very compassionate purposes, well, it's a fair game according to Pluto and Jupiter, because they give us the power and we do what we want with it. So we can seek our own truth, our own faith with this. We can also use it to manipulate and gain, because Pluto, especially retrograde, is the power of money, especially in the sign of Capricorn, the power we possess over material reality. And for some people that is just money. They can buy anything, they can influence everything with their money. But it can also represent the hand of justice, the law. Jupiter has much to do with it. And the sign of Capricorn is a very karmic sign, and it is full of duties and responsibilities, ruled by Saturn, the lord of karma. So it can also represent as, like legal cases, especially within centralized power, government, organizations, all of that. Now, at the same time, we also have another sextile in the sky, which isn't that powerful anymore, but it's still relatively potent, because this sextile is going to be reformed when Mercury goes retrograde, and it will speak once more with Uranus, its higher octave, in the same manner of conversation, a sextile. So this can represent surprises, it can represent unexpected events, it can play out as help, communication, information, solidarity, reaching us from our families, our loved ones, our culture, our local community, those people who we regard as family or we have a very strong emotional connection with. It can also be like epiphanies, big ideas, moments of brainstorming, which also have an emotional factor to it, and also have much to do with compassion and solidarity, because regardless of what epiphany we have or the brainstorming that we perform, its main purpose is not just to serve us, but also serve our loved ones, our families, nurture others. So this is a very compassionate energy. And also, even if this doesn't have anything to do with it, Mars meeting Neptune in the sign of Pisces, its most positive expression can be compassion, can be solidarity, it can be having the emotional power and strength and belief to do anything for the greater good of others, even self-sacrifice. Another very influential sextile, which is not going to be that strong yet, but it can still be a powerful influence, is Mars speaking in this type of conversation with Pluto. Now this is very important because Pluto is the higher octave of Mars, so both of these planets are very powerful, action oriented, where Mars is our own ambition, our drive, the force of our will, and Pluto, it can be our psychological strength, it can represent our influence, and also very fated power. In other words, the power we hold over our fates and destinies, basically our choices and what we do. Every action has a reaction. Everything that we put out in the universe creates a big echo. And this is a potent magical energy because, Mars in the sign of Pisces, together with Neptune, it is our own divine spark, our connection to source, which can also be fantasy, it can also be dreams, but ultimately fantasy is creational energy. And Pluto, in the sign of manifestation, Capricorn, can represent our true powers. And when these two planets speak together in this manner of conversation, where it all depends on our wills, it all depends on our choices, our inner impulse, well, our fantasies and whatever we dream about or we wish can come to reality, especially with that Mars there. And also, this can play out in a totally different way, where this can be used as a healing energy, because Pluto is the planet of psychoanalysis. So if there's any trauma, blockages, or anything that is preventing us from living our lives, living our inner truth as we desire, it feels most natural and comfortable to us, well, we can remove this, because Pluto is the power of change more so than ever when it meets in this type of way with its lower octave Mars. So, if it would be a trine, we would have absolutely no word in this, because a trine is a blessing. It doesn't depend on our actions or anything, but a sextile depends very much on what we choose, what we focus on, or however we use divine guidance, and that gives us the control. Also, another way which this energy can play out is artists creating their biggest masterpieces or their big breakthrough work, which can give them a lot of influence over, the lives of others in a very positive way, of course. As I said, this is just the beginning of this energy. So if you're an artist, if you're a creator, if you use fantasy and imagination to do something, for example, Neptune in Pisces is music, songs, poetry, all this kind of, specific Neptunian type of activities, then you'll have a massive celestial empowerment which is going to last a couple of months, especially after Neptune goes retrograde and its symbolism turns inwards, giving you even more power to tap into your true mastery, into the magic and mystery of your own soul, and of course altered state of consciousness. Even though this is a sextile, a positive energy, it can also have a slightly dark side, because this is also the power of escapism, substances, and, rather unhealthy activities, where Pluto can also represent obsession. So, you can feel, if you're into all of this, you can feel a very irresistible desire to just immerse into that world of escapism. But as I said, it depends very much how we use this celestial conversation. Now, last but not least, at the very, very end of the week, we have two minor astrological conversations which could be somewhat influential. We're talking about quincunxes, where the Sun forms this conversation with Pluto and Jupiter. And quincunx is an astrological configuration which links together two different areas of life which apparently have absolutely nothing in common, have nothing to do with each other, and usually this creates surprising moments, delightful moments, but also awkward, shameful, unusual moments. And it can have much to do with the world stage, because Gemini is communication, news, the media, and Capricorn is the world stage, centralized power, law and order, rules and regulations, traditions, patriarchy, institutions, and all of that. Big organizations. So this can play out in a number of different ways, where personally we might receive some news which can be, not exactly what it seems, but ultimately it can be helpful. Jupiter is the planet of blessing after all, and it doesn't matter that much that it is not very potent in the sign of Capricorn, it's debilitated. It can still be some good news, an offer of help, a job offer, a career offer, which comes out of the blue unexpectedly, and it may not even resonate with you. It may not even, have that much to do with you and your professional background and with what you used to do in life, your studies and all of that. But it is a potential chance, an opportunity. But at the same time, it can play out as problems, as bad news, as complications, which are a result of an error or a miscommunication, a misinterpretation, which might require you a little bit of effort to clear it out, sort it out. Or this can also represent the type of news where it appears something very shocking, negative, distressful, but ultimately it will turn to something positive. But the negative side of this can be fake promises. It can be, a little bit of deception, manipulation, people leading you on, people wanting something from you in a very indirect manner. But on the world stage, well, this can play out as some kind of very shocking news. Maybe the unexpected, sudden passing away, death, or problems, maybe medical problems of a world leader or a religious leader or a very important person reaching us. But even here, not everything is as it seems, or it can also be fake news. It can be some kind of fabricated news which shocks us, but it will ultimately turn out to be just a hoax, just something exaggerated. Jupiter is the planet of expansion, so a news which is something really minor as an ant can be amplified to look as an elephant. So this is where we have to be very, very careful what we believe, because everything is not what it seems. So we have to really be patient and filter out information before we jump into any conclusion. And this includes positive news as well, because it can be like, a promise that a solution is coming, that they have figured it out, that the economic collapse is not a reality anymore. But that's where we cannot believe really anything, even if it's shocking negatively or shocking positively. We have to, use our rationality, the sun in Gemini, the light of our intellects, to filter out everything because it's gonna be dual, very dual. It can also be good and bad at the same time. For example, something bad that happens, something fated, Pluto and Jupiter, which seems really, really negative, but ultimately it's gonna lead to something more positive, or a resolution, a solution, a closure, a conclusion, or of some kind. So this is where quincunxes are very tricky energies, and I personally see it as divine humor, but when it has to do with the world stage, it might not seem as funny to us as it does to the divine. Well, thank you so much for listening. Wish everyone a blessed and safe week. Please remember the potential of the square at the beginning of the week, changing the way you feel towards the past, changing your emotional attachments to whatever happened to you in the past can change the present and ultimately the future. Thank you once again. Until next time, bye for now.